Happy Easter, guys. My name is Adam. If this is your first time here, why don't you go ahead and take a seat. Only God can take an instrument of death and turn it into a song where we sing about victory, right? That is just amazing. Hey, before I get going, would you guys pray with me? Jesus, thank you so much. What a day, this day, where we celebrate your resurrection, Lord. I pray for everybody here, Lord, that we would be able to actually connect with that, Lord. Actually feel it. Look right at it and actually understand the impact of it. Our hearts to be open. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. All right. Well, today we celebrate the most important thing that ever happened. According to Christians anyways, right? And I'm going to do something. I'm just going to make an assumption that you already know the story, right? Everybody knows the story, right? You know that Jesus died on a cross, right? You're not sitting here going, wait a minute, it was a cross? I thought it was something else, right? You already knew that. I'm going to even assume that you know the detail that he rose from the dead 3 days later. Everybody knows that, right? You're sitting here thinking, I thought it was like a week or a month. You know that Jesus died on the cross and rose from the dead 3 days later. Everybody knows that. But when I say everybody knows, I don't mean that everybody believes, right? Just because you know the story doesn't mean you believe the story. You can know the story. You can even be able to recite the story. But that doesn't mean that you believe it, right? I mean, you got to know it to believe it, but you don't need to believe it to know it. Knowing the story and believing the story a lot of times can be worlds apart. So I want to talk to you today about a guy in the Bible who struggled, he knew the story, but he really struggled to believe the story. He knew the story, but he struggled to believe the story a lot. A lot. He knew the story in gruesome and intimate detail. He knew the story better than any of us here, but he really struggled to believe it. To the point that he actually picks up a nickname because of this event that has stuck with him now for 2,000 years. His name almost became a cliche in certain circles. So the guy I want to talk to you about this morning, his name is Thomas. And in the Bible, Thomas has a nickname. He actually has lots of nicknames. So in the Bible, his nickname is Didymus, Thomas Didymus. And Didymus means twin. So the disciples kind of called him Twin. The disciples actually had a lot of nicknames, by the way. James and John were called the sons of thunder. Peter was called Peter, but his name means rock, so they called him Rocky. So they kind of did the nickname thing. And Thomas they called Twin. Hey, Twin, what's up? And then so this week I was doing a bunch of research on this story, and I was listening to a lot of guys, reading a lot of guys, and a lot of pastors, big churches, guys I used to respect. They made this joke. So Thomas Didymus, they gave him a new nickname. They wanted to give him the nickname, I don't even know if I should tell, I'm afraid my wife's going to laugh. They thought it was hilarious. They thought it was clever. They called Thomas Didymus T. Diddy. Everybody who laughed, get out. I wasn't sure. I'm literally, thank you, get out now. That's the lowest form of humor. My wife laughs at all this stuff. That's like puns and dad jokes right there, and she loves it. I don't get it. It's part of why I love her. So you got Thomas Didymus. Evidently you have T. Diddy, but that's not. Neither one of those are the nicknames that I want to talk to you about today. The nickname that has stuck with Thomas for 2,000 years is Doubting Thomas. Doubting Thomas. And I think if you asked Thomas which one he would rather be called, T. Diddy or Doubting Thomas, he might just go with this one, even though it's got a worse connotation to it. Doubting Thomas. He knew the story, but he struggled to believe the story. So I don't know where you're at when it comes to your faith. There's a lot of people, you come on Easter, I have no idea where you're at. So some of you got this thing down, right? That maybe you're sitting there going, I got this faith thing down. For me, I don't really struggle with doubt. And for you, maybe faith has been this perfectly straight, gradually increasing line towards God, and you're really good today. That's awesome. And if that's you, I am not talking to you today. You're good, right? You just do you. You're all right. But if you're sitting here and maybe Like in your thinking and processing about faith, you've struggled with doubt, you've wrestled with doubt. If for you, your journey of faith has been more of like a 2 steps forward, 3 steps back, like you make progress, then you lose progress, you go into kind of a zigzag line. If you wrestle with doubt, struggle with doubt, then this sermon this morning is for you. You and me can learn a lot from this guy named Thomas. So we're going to look at every single verse that there is about Thomas in the Bible. And maybe that makes you nervous. I promise I'll get you home for lunch. There's only about 20, okay? There's only about 20 verses. If you take like the places where it just lists him as one of the 12 disciples. So Thomas is one of Jesus' 12 disciples. He's in the top 12. So he's kind of a big deal when it comes to that. But if you take those to the side, there's less than 20 verses about Thomas. And all of them are found in the book of John. And even though we only have like 20 verses, I think we get a really good feel for like his personality, like who he is. Okay, and I think you'll agree with me as we look at these. So the first place we see Thomas is in the story of Jesus raising Lazarus from the dead. Now, we don't have time to go into that story in detail, but basically Jesus' friend Lazarus has died. Jesus was not there when it happened, and Jesus decides that he wants to go to where Lazarus' body is. His disciples do not want to go. And they have so they kind of start arguing with Jesus, which by the way is a stupid idea, but they tried it anyways. So they start arguing with Jesus, and they have a couple of reasons. Number one, they've only ever seen Jesus heal. They've never seen Jesus do anything beyond heal. So they're kind of putting limits on Jesus, saying, hey, like Lazarus is dead now. Like you could have, if you would have went a couple of days ago, healed him, but now he's dead. So maybe like this is kind of a pointless trip. Their second reason that they did not want to go is because where Lazarus was in that region, there was a lot of people who wanted to kill Jesus. Last time they were there was a group that tried to stone him, throw rocks at him till he was dead, and Jesus had to kind of book it out of there. So the disciples are like, hey, like Jesus, we love Lazarus too, but he's dead, and there's people trying to kill you, so like maybe we shouldn't do this. So they're having this argument with Jesus kind of back and forth, and Jesus says a lot of things. We don't have time to go into the details, but basically Jesus is like, come on guys, let's go. And at the end of this argument, our boy Thomas shows up and he speaks for the first time. These are his first recorded words in the Bible, his first speaking part, right here in John 11:16. Thomas, nicknamed the twin, Didymus. Since you guys laughed at T. Diddy, I feel like tempted to say it now and I would betray myself. Thomas, nicknamed the twin, said to his fellow disciples, let's go to and die with Jesus. Let's go to and die with Jesus. Now, some people, since his nickname is Doubting Thomas, they kind of take that label and they put it over this statement and they say like, oh man, look how negative and look how full of doubt that statement is. He doesn't believe that Jesus can do anything. He's just being negative. He's just being full of doubt. But I think to say that this statement is purely pessimistic is a severe oversimplification. Thomas has got a complex sense of humor, much deeper than some of you, evidently. I'll give you that this is a little dark. I'll give you that this is a little morbid. But like some of you get this, right? You get this kind of humor. This is the dark, sarcastic kind of humor, right? Come on, guys, let's go and die with Jesus. Like you get this. Some of you talk like this all the time. It's a little concerning sometimes. But if it was just a full-on doubting, pessimistic statement, wouldn't it instead be, hey, Jesus, have fun with that. We're going to stay here and live. You can go die. Like, wouldn't that be the more, it would still be sarcastic, but it wouldn't be the go with part. The go with part's the part that doesn't make sense here. If you just want to say he's full of doubt, if you just want to say he's a full-on pessimist. So yes, he's pessimistic. I would say this statement even shows us that he's a little cynical, a little sarcastic. He definitely has some dark humor. But he's also loyal to his friend. He's known Jesus for 3 years now. He's curious about Jesus. Like, he doesn't fully know who Jesus is. He hasn't fully figured Jesus out yet, but Jesus has done some things that he can't explain. He said some things that have blown his mind, and he's curious about Jesus. And yeah, he's a little dark in his humor. But maybe this is to hide the fact that he's curious to see what Jesus will do. Maybe he's hiding behind his humor. None of us know anything about that, right? None of you hide behind your humor ever, right? Maybe he's less of a doubting pessimist, more of a cynic. And behind every cynic is a disappointed idealist, right? So maybe Thomas has been burned in the past. Maybe Thomas has put his hope in some things in the past and he's gotten burned and he's trained himself to not dare put his hope in something. That optimist that's covered up in there somewhere, that optimist idealist, it's covered up with lots of disappointment. So he can't come out and say, let's see what he can do. He has to cover it with a little bit of humor. He has to cover it with a little bit of morbid, dark, joke kind of stuff. Let's go to and die with Jesus. So based on this sentence, I think we kind of unpack a little bit of Thomas's personality. Yes, he focuses on the negative. He's definitely sarcastic, which speaks to my heart. And he's also loyal, a loyal friend. He's curious about Jesus and he's cynical. So that buried deep down inside of him, there's something else. Deep down inside of him, he's not a pure pessimist. There's something else in there as well. He really does want to see what Jesus can do. So that's the first place. One sentence, I think we learn he's cynical. The second place we see him is at the Last Supper. So if you grew up in church, you're familiar with that story. Even if you didn't grow up in church, you've at least seen the picture of them all sitting around at the Last Supper. Lots of stuff happens at the Last Supper that, again, we do not have time to go into all of it. I just want to look at Thomas's part. So if we look at the beginning of John chapter 14, we see where Jesus says, kind of has a little monologue here, and here's what Jesus says. Don't let your hearts be troubled. Trust in God and trust also in me. There's more than enough room in my Father's home. If this were not so, would I have told you that I'm going to prepare a place for you? When everything is ready, I will come and get you so that you will always be with me where I am. Verse 4, really important. And you know the way to where I'm going. So again, just picture the scene. You got 12 disciples all sitting around. They're eating. They're having a good time. Now Jesus is saying a lot of stuff that they don't fully understand. Jesus is a little kind of down. Jesus isn't as happy as he normally is, so it's throwing him off. The whole mood of the dinner has kind of taken a little bit heavier of a feel. And then Jesus says this. And right here at the end, he leaves a pregnant pause here. And you know the way to where I'm going. And I just want you to imagine like the disciples' faces. Like some are like, And Peter's over here going, yeah, wait, I know. And John's elbowing him, what is he talking about? I don't have a clue. That's Peter's personality, right? And some of them are thinking, what, has he said this before? Like trying to rack their brain, like what is Jesus talking about? But our boy Thomas, he doesn't play that game, right? Thomas isn't that kind of personality. So Thomas just pipes up right after Jesus says this. No, we don't, Lord. What you talking about, Jesus? You don't know what? We have no idea where you're going. So how can we know the way? Thomas plays this role in like every single speaking part he has in the Bible where he just says what everybody's thinking. That's Thomas's personality. He just kind of blurts the thing out. They're afraid to say it. Like, actually, I don't know what you're talking about. Thomas is like, Peter, what are you talking about? We don't know what you're talking about, Jesus. We don't know what you're talking about. We don't even know where you're going. How can we know the way? So I think this shows us that Thomas, he's like an analytical guy, like he's not going to let something slip by that he's confused on. He's not going to nod his head at something if he doesn't understand it. He doesn't just accept things. He processes them. He analyzes them. He catches inconsistency. He needs stuff to add up, right? And if it doesn't, he's going to say something. He's going to say, hey, this doesn't make sense to me. Some of you really feel that. You understand Thomas on a personal level. The cool part is, again, you just kind of get this little, like this biting, sarcastic kind of personality that Thomas has here. And yet he sets Jesus up to say one of the most important things that Jesus says in his whole life. So if you're a Christian, you've seen this verse just plastered, kind of ripped out of its context and just put places. And it can stand alone. But you might not know what set it up. That Thomas saying this set Jesus up to say this. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one can come to the Father except through me. Thomas set Jesus up to say this. And again, this is really one of the most important things that Jesus said. And just to kind of go into this a little bit, this is both an inclusive and an exclusive statement that Jesus makes here. It's inclusive and exclusive. And that's, by the way, that's what Christianity is. If you don't know that, it's a little bit of both. I know that sounds like an oxymoron, like inclusively exclusive. Those are contradictory. But it's inclusive in that everyone is invited. Everyone is invited. The invitation of Christianity is unlimited. It is open to all. No one, no matter their background, their past, their life situation, is excluded from the invitation of Jesus. It is open to all. No people group, no background, no nothing can exclude you from the invitation of Jesus. And yet, it's exclusive in that Jesus very specifically says that he is the only way to God. He is the only way to God. Now, I know that's not super popular these days, but I didn't say it, Jesus did. Okay? This is his words. And I guess if you're sitting here and you're at least mildly curious about Jesus, if you're at least you know what, the guy had a lot of good things to say, you have to throw this in there and at least consider the fact that the guy also said this. If you thought some of the other stuff that he said was good, you need to look at this. And you're going to have to decide what you do with that. You have to decide. You have to play a little bit of Thomas here, do some processing, do some analyzing and say, okay, Jesus said he was the way, the truth, and the life. Do I believe him or not? So Thomas is sitting there. Thomas just kind of set Jesus up for this, right? Lord, we don't know where you're going. How can we know the way? And Jesus says this back to him. And I wonder if Thomas just didn't sit there if he's not doing the thing you're doing right now, what do I do with that? That's a bold statement, Jesus. And then, how's he going to process it in this moment? But what happens next, no matter how he processes it, has to take him off guard. Because just hours after this statement, Jesus is arrested, beaten, tortured, and brutally killed. Just hours after saying he is the way, the truth, and the life, he's dead. For Thomas, again, if things need to add up for him, that had to mess with him, for sure. How can the guy who just said he is the way, the truth, and the life end up dead and not very long after saying it? So I really want you to right now, with what we know about Thomas, try to put yourself in Thomas's shoes. We got a cynical guy who I believe, even though, yes, he's negative on the surface, even though, yes, he's sarcastic on the surface, I believe it's to cover something up inside of him, this idealist, this optimist who's buried deep inside of there because of the disappointment, whatever it may be in his life that he's experienced. This guy who's been loyal to Jesus for 3 years, he's developed this friendship with this guy. He's curious about Jesus. He's hoping that Jesus might be more than just a man, that statements like this might be pointing to something even deeper than Thomas has dared yet believe. And he watches as Jesus is killed. One of his best friends in the world. He has to watch it in a dramatic and public and unjust way. Now, the Bible says that only John, out of all the 12 disciples, only John was close. John and Jesus actually had a conversation where Jesus was hanging on the cross talking to John, so John was that close. But I believe that Thomas was close enough to see. He may have been buried in the crowd somewhere with a hood up, but I believe Thomas was there. I believe Thomas saw Jesus get beaten. Maybe he had to do one of these, but I think he saw it. I think Thomas saw as that cross got put on his back and he started to try and carry and he couldn't do it. I think Thomas watched that. And can you just imagine watching one of your friends go through that? I think he heard the sound of that hammer hit. I think every time it hit, he knew what it was doing. He felt it, it reverberated through his soul. And then he watched as they slowly raised his friend's beaten and bloody body up into the air. He saw the sky go dark. He's standing there watching. And then he hears from a distance, he's not close enough to fully hear, but it echoes out over everything. It is finished. And I wonder if Thomas interpreted that differently. The cynic. Yeah, it is. It is finished. And then from a distance, maybe the light's not hitting right, so he just sees the silhouette of a Roman soldier walk up and stab Jesus in the side with a spear just to make sure that it's over. And Thomas having to close his eyes and just walk away and be like, I can't do this anymore. I can't do this. That cynic who dared start to just crack into hope that something might be here, boom, gone, taken. He's dead. 3 days pass. Can you just imagine what that was like? Walking around almost in a fog, crying, wrestling with emotions, 3 years of following Jesus, a close relationship, a hope that he was more than just a man, gone, taken from him. And then just imagine, so Sunday morning, all the disciples are just sitting around. You ever been in a room with somebody else who's also going through something really heavy, and you're just kind of there? There's nothing to say, but like the grief in the room kind of just hangs. It almost feels like it's actually heavy in the room, and nobody's saying anything. You're just there. I think that's what it was. I think it was a very quiet Sunday morning where they're all just kind of sitting here. Thoughts won't even go very far. And all of a sudden, in this fog, like this energy breaks through, and these two ladies come bursting into their group, and they just blurt out, Jesus' body is missing. They can't find it. And John and Peter get up and just take off running. But the Bible doesn't say what the other disciples did. Can I guess? So listen, out of all the disciples, I feel like Thomas is the one, he's my favorite. I know that's weird. Doubting Thomas is my favorite disciple. Some people like Peter, some people like Philip because he's the eternal optimist, but I really, really like Thomas. So if I can guess how Thomas responded when these ladies came up and said that Jesus' body was stolen, the cynic who's already ticked off, he's already at a low-level boil right now, when he hears that Jesus' body is not there, he's got to be just like, figures. They kill him, they torture him, they publicly mock him, and now they got to desecrate his grave. Figures. I think the other disciples just got to be sitting there like this, like, oh man, will you just shut up, Thomas? Like, you ever have somebody who's just so mad you don't even want to deal with their anger? But I feel like that's Thomas, man. He's got to be hot here. But then the day just gets weirder from there. Because Mary, one of the women, leaves and then comes back, and she's more frantic than the first time. And this time, all she can get out is, I have seen the Lord. And I just got to imagine that Thomas is standing off the side going, what, you found him? Right? And then, no. She says, no. He talked to me. He's alive. And you just got to see Thomas standing over here going, women, right? Like, for real. I know that's, listen, it was 2,000 years ago. They were definitely sexist. I was trying to be in the moment, okay? And then Peter comes back, and Peter says, guys, I just had a conversation with Jesus. I'm not even kidding. And Thomas has got to be over here. Maybe Thomas didn't like come out and just say something mocking. Maybe Thomas is in here going, okay, Peter, I get it, man. Like, you denied him. You're dealing with a lot right now. Like, all right, dude, like you're struggling right now. He's trying to find a way to process what these people are saying. And then some other followers of Jesus outside of the 12, a guy named Cleopas comes in, and he says, hey, we were walking on this road, and Jesus just started walking with us, and then we had like a meal with him. It was him. He's alive. And I just imagine that Thomas is kind of off to the side over here, and all of a sudden there's this buzz starting with the disciples. There's this hushed expectation, this whisper that what if it's true? What if it's true? What if you guys aren't crazy? Like, what if it's true? And they all have this kind of buzz going, and Thomas is sitting off here to the side. And remember, Thomas is like, I get the impression that Thomas is dealing with this on a deeper level than everybody else. He's carrying this heavy. He's that cynic. He just dared start to put his hope in something, and he watched it be murdered. He's not about to do it again. So they're over here having this hush, and they're making plans to have dinner that night and talk about this. And I think Thomas, standing over here, goes, you guys are morons. And he walked away. And he didn't go. And I bet, Philip's got a bleeding heart. Thomas, hold up, And Peter's like, just let him go, man. Just let him go. Just let him go. He needs to think about this. He needs to process this. So he doesn't go to their dinner that night, on Sunday night. And I wonder what he did. If you read everybody's like, why wasn't he there? Why wasn't he there? I think he wasn't there because he couldn't do it. He was the cynic. He couldn't sit around and talk about that because he just watched Jesus be brutally murdered. It was too much for him. He couldn't even begin to dare to believe that might be true. So he's walking around the city, thinking about this, processing this. He knows the story, but he doesn't believe the story. Again, he knows the whole story now. Died on a cross, watched that, saw it happen. 3 days later, now he's rose from the dead. Don't believe that. Don't believe that. So he's broken, he's hurting, he's confused. But he decides, you know what, whatever, these guys are my friends. Even if they're crazy, they're my friends. So he makes his way back, hoping they're kind of wrapping things up. He goes to pull on the door and it doesn't open. The morons lock the door. Okay, knock, knock, knock. And inside the door, he hears this it's not even hushed now. There's raucous excitement inside the door. And the door bursts open and his friends kind of ambush him. Dude, he was here. He was here. He walked through a wall, which is crazy. And he was here. Jesus actually is alive. And dude, you missed it. You missed it. And I can just read how he responds. His most famous line. One of the 12 disciples, Thomas, named the twin, was not with the other disciples when Jesus came. They told him, "We've seen the Lord." He replied, "I won't believe it unless I see the nail wounds in his hands, I put my fingers into them, and I place my hand on the wound on his side." If you grew up in church, you've heard that 100 times. And my problem with the way we always read this sentence down here, it's a temperature thing for me. We read it cold instead of hot. And I think you're wrong if you read it cold. What I mean by cold, you just read it like he was a robot. I won't believe unless I see the nail wounds in his hands and put my fingers into them and place my hand into the wound on his side. No. You've got a guy who's he's a little unstable right now. He's walked through the city crying his eyes out. He walked by a construction site a minute ago and he heard that and it sent him into he just started bawling. He couldn't process this. So his friends come up and say, "He's alive." And this explodes out of him. Shut up. I can't begin to believe that. I watched him die. You can say, doubting Thomas, he should have believed his friends. And I think he would say back to you, you know what? You can say that you believe without seeing Jesus, but you didn't have to watch him murdered like I did. I think that's what he would say back to us. You guys weren't there. You didn't see it. You don't understand how bad it was. I think that's what he would say back to us. He explodes. This just comes out of him. I'm not going to believe this until those nails, the echo of that hitting still reverberates into my soul. I'm not going to believe until I can put my finger there. And every time I close my eyes, I see that spear go into his side. I'm not going to believe until I can put my hand in that hole. I won't do it. The temperature of this verse is hot. And I think it comes from the place of that cynic. It's that cynic, man. If you've been burned enough, if you've been disappointed enough, every time you go to put your hope in something, it's super risky because you've already got a wound there where you tried to hope for this thing and then you got disappointed. So you built this layer of cynicism around to defend yourself from disappointment again. So when they say that Jesus is alive, when he was just disappointed in the biggest way of his life 3 days ago, he's not about to open that defense mechanism back up and say, okay. No. He just can't do it. So he says these famous lines that have caused him to be labeled doubter for 2,000 years. But I think we mislabel him. I don't think it's doubt. I think it's more emotion and pain and cynicism. There's doubt there, but I don't think it's only doubt. So after this, for a full week, in the Bible it's like one sentence, but for a full week, he just lives in this. God kind of lets him simmer for a full week. And a week later, can you just imagine what that week would be like? Now he's got to be wavering because he's analytical. He's not stupid. He may be a little cynical. He may be more of a realist, but all of his friends say Jesus is alive. That's worth something in his head. He's got to be disbelieving his belief, doubting his doubts. He's all over the place now. What if it's true? What if it's true? What if Jesus really is alive? Because he doesn't want Jesus to be dead, but now what if he is alive? What does he do with that? Because he's the only disciple who hasn't seen him alive, besides Judas. That's not great company to be in, right? What does that mean? So now, he's got to be thinking all kinds of, Peter denied Jesus before he died. Now, if this is true, I've denied Jesus after he came back to life. That's got to be worse. And he hasn't appeared to me yet. And yeah, I wasn't there, but what does that mean, Jesus? What if he is alive and now I've rejected my best friend? I've not believed in him like I was supposed to. All those things he said that I didn't quite get, he must have meant for real, that he was actually going to come back to life. I didn't believe him. What does that mean? He's got to be all over the place. So about a week later, the disciples get together again and they have another meal. And this time Thomas comes. This is the beginning of the verse. 8 days later, the disciples were together again, and this time Thomas was with them. The doors were locked. They insist on locking the doors. I don't know why. They cannot keep Jesus out, no matter what they do. This right here, I just wanted to pause right here and tell you how awesome I think this is. Because 8 days, about a week previous, Thomas pretty much yelled at all the disciples and said he didn't believe what they believe, and that, unless he had some really hard evidence, he wasn't going to believe it. And yet, they're together. Isn't that cool? It means two things. Number one, Thomas didn't push away from them, even though he didn't believe the same as them, even though he wasn't quite in the same place with his faith as they were. They were still able to have a relationship. They were still like friends. And the second thing it means is that they didn't push away from Thomas. They didn't exclude him, even though he wasn't in the exact same place as they were when it comes to faith. They didn't push him away. They didn't say, man, don't invite Thomas. That guy, he's just a wet blanket on our whole fun here. They didn't do that. And it doesn't, I wonder what that means. Do you think maybe they just kind of okay, dude, okay. We don't have to debate this. We don't have to talk, all right, man, just come on. Just come have dinner with us. Just be with us, man. That's really cool, and I think that's something for us to remember, no matter which side you're on. If you're the doubter and you're not quite sure about this whole thing, that doesn't mean you have to exclude yourself from people who do. And then also, if you're a person who does believe, you do have faith, that definitely means you don't exclude people who don't, right? There's a dual message in this, because something really cool happens now. They're all in this room eating, and I don't know, I imagine that maybe the meal was done and they're kind of talking in little pockets of the room, and all of a sudden, but suddenly, as before, Jesus was standing among them. Peace be with you, he said. And then he said to Thomas, hey, doubter, what the heck, man? Nope. I'm so disappointed in you, Thomas. Why didn't you believe in me? Nope. Put your finger here, man. Look at my hands. Put your hand in the wound on my side. Don't be faithless any longer. Believe. And then Thomas makes one of the biggest statements of faith in the Bible. My Lord and my God. Just picture that. Guys, this is so important for you to put yourself in the Bible when you read it, because it feels more real when you try to actually imagine what it would be like to be there. He's over off to the side of this room, talking to Peter and John, maybe kind of listening to him, kind of not. And, he's nodding his head, and all of a sudden, man, his eyes go over. And there he is, and don't you just imagine it was like an inhale, but one of those broken inhales, he can't quite actually, and it was like a little bit of a step back. And all the disciples, all the heads kind of turned. Peter's smiling. Jerk, shut up. And Jesus makes a beeline for him. And don't you think so this is the guy, he's been on he's on a low-level rumble here. He's not okay. He's not okay. And all of a sudden, there's this guy who he watched 10 days ago die. He watched him die, and he's walking towards him. Don't you think he just kind of he probably just collapsed. And Jesus could have said anything. Jesus could have condemned him. Jesus could have walked up to him with his hands behind his back. Hey, Thomas. But he didn't. He walked up. Hey, man. Check it out. It's where they pinned me. It's where they stuck me, right here. Believe. don't you, like the analytical guy, the cynical guy, he's got to be just in his head over and over again. It's true. It's true. It's true. He's alive. He's alive. He's alive. He's alive. Like it's washing over him in this moment. And then he makes this statement. And again, this is one of the biggest statements of faith in the Bible, to contrast the statement of doubt, my Lord and my God. He's the first one to declare that after Jesus resurrects. And then Jesus says this to him, and this is the part that's important to us. Then Jesus told him, you believe because you have seen me. Blessed are those who believe without seeing me. That's to you, by the way. You know that? That's to you. That's to me. Jesus was speaking about us here, very specifically. John, who wrote this and was there for this, made sure to include this for you. So I just want to talk to you if faith doesn't come easy to you. Because maybe you're like Thomas, maybe you're cynical, maybe you're analytical, maybe things have to add up for you and you're like a guy was dead and now he's alive. Nah, that doesn't make any sense. And I think sometimes we have this perception that in order to believe it has to be clean, right? Like in order to have faith, you have to have like this bright light experience, this perfectly straight, gradually increasing line towards God. And if it's not that, then I must not be the kind of person who has faith. That must just not be me. But the message of Thomas is that sometimes the journey of faith is a messy one. And that having doubt and disbelief built into your story does not exclude you from faith. It does not. Sometimes the journey of faith is a 2 steps forward and 3 steps backward process, and that's okay. Doubt is not the opposite of faith. Doubt is a part of the process of faith. The only way that doubt is the opposite of faith is if you just leave it. If you don't engage it. And Thomas did not disengage from his doubt. He engaged it. Doubt can be a part of the process. Matter of fact, doubt has to be a part of the process. At some point, everybody in here was a doubter. At some point. Anybody who says, I've been a Christian my whole life. No, you weren't. No, you weren't. We've all had a process. And every one of us has had doubts cross through here and cross through here. Everybody. It's a part of the process. So don't be sitting here thinking, I doubt this must not be for me. No. Thomas thought the same thing, and it was. And what if, you choose to believe something even though you don't understand every aspect of it? Which I know kind of breaks some of your own personal rules that you have, but you know what? You believe in computers even though you don't understand every aspect of them, right? You believe in that black hole they took a picture of even though you don't understand that at all. Can't you choose to believe that Jesus came back from the dead even though you don't understand how? See, if you're a doubter today, I want you to know that this story of Jesus rising from the dead has changed the course of history, because generations of people don't just know the story, they believe it. They believe it. And Thomas, that's one of the best parts. So after this, the disciples have the process isn't done. They go through a little bit more, but Thomas ends up, he goes to India to be a missionary, to tell people. And by the way, when I say mission, it's such a loaded word. He goes to India to tell people about this story hey guys, listen, so I didn't believe. It was like 10 days, didn't believe. And I kid you not, he walked through the wall and he talked to me and he held out his hand to me. That's what he went to India to tell. He went to India to tell the thing that he experienced. To the point, you know how Thomas died? Tradition tells us that Thomas died by being stabbed with a spear. Fitting, right? For sharing his faith. So, if you're a cynic, if you're a doubter, it's got to be worth something to you. It's got to be worth something that a guy who is super cynical, super pessimistic, super analytical, once convinced, was so convinced that he gave up his life to share the story. That's got to be worth something to you. It might not be worth a ton. You might doubt everything I just said, but it should be worth something. And there are a lot of people sitting in this room who don't just know the story, they believe it. And it's not just that we believe it, but that we believe that it happened and that it means something to us. That Jesus, just like he walked across the room to Thomas in a loving and in an accepting way, he wants to do the same thing to you. Even if you have doubts, even if you're a pessimist, even if you're cynical, Jesus is saying to you, hey, I died and I'm not dead anymore. And I died for you. There was purpose behind that. That Jesus died on the cross in your place for your sins. And he took your sin onto himself. Everything you've ever done in your life, every negative thing, every wrong thought, every time you've gone right when you should have went left, Jesus took that onto himself on the cross spiritually. He took it. And the Bible says if you believe in him, you put your faith in him, that he will give you his righteousness, his goodness. And that after that, you can have an unbroken relationship with God, that he is the way, the truth, and the life to have a relationship with God. That if you put your faith, your trust in him, you can have that, and your sins can be forgiven. Everything you've ever done can be wiped clean. You can be free. Free. You just have to make the decision to believe. That's the first step, by the way. And I think you can make that step without having it all figured out. If you're sitting here right now and there's something happening in your heart and you feel like, man, something, and it's not you, there's something happening outside of you, kind of like, and you would almost maybe call it speaking to you, that's God. God's drawing you right now to believe in him. Don't leave here without making a decision. All you got to do, it's so stupid. This is the best part of Christianity. It's the kind of thing that you just can't even believe that it's true. Is just believe. What Jesus said to Thomas, believe. Believe in him. Trust in him. You don't have to do anything. There's no thing you have to go do. You just put your faith, your trust in Jesus. You just pray a prayer saying, Lord, I give you my life. I surrender it to you. I forgive me for everything I've ever done. And something happens in the spiritual. And he starts to change your heart from that moment forward. Don't leave here without that. And Christian, if you've already done that, that transaction's already taken place and you already believe this. You knew the story and you believe the story. What does it mean to you? Man, it changed Thomas's life completely. Thomas, the cynic no more. He was sold, man. It was like anything he could do to push the story out and be on the mission that Jesus gave him that he could. What does it mean to you? What does Easter mean to you? Is there something that God wants to do with you to nudge you a little bit today? Don't leave here without giving it to him. Just open your hand up and give it to him.